I guess you just heard, we are recording this meeting so that we can post it for people who are not able to attend. We do have concurrent sessions and are hoping that people can watch the videos for sessions they missed. Back to this presentation. Amy Piaget has been the County Conservationist in Dane County for the last 5 years. Prior to joining Dane County Land and Water Resources Department, she worked at Wisconsin DNR in the non-point and CAFO programs, and spent some time with the Calumet County LWCD. In her spare time, she attempts to wrangle her 2 kids, 3 cats, and a tireless husky. Amy, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. I am not going to share my video because it's not helping my internet connection. So I apologize if you really wanted to see my bright and smiling face from home, but not gonna happen. So I am gonna kind of talk, when I first pitched this idea to Matt, because they were looking for ideas for the county con meeting, I recommended a completely different speaker who probably could have spoke on this topic way better than I can, but they were not available, so I guess was the backup. And I originally titled this Other Duties as Assigned, and you'll kind of see why, because this is going to be kind of my take on what I had to learn in a kind of crash course setting. So you can do next slide. Probably should, I think. All right, so a few disclaimers here. This is, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff that I may or may not be talking about. So I'm not an expert in the dairy industry. I don't have any expertise in economics or supply chains or processing, global markets, pandemics, all those things. So this was kind of a learn as I go. I don't have a farm background, so I don't have that to kind of rely on for understanding some of this. As a point of interest, I learned all the popular breeds of cows in biology class when I was in Vermont, which is an odd thing I think to learn in school. And really all of this that I'm gonna go through, I had to figure out in about 3 weeks, right at the beginning of this whole pandemic thing, when we were all sent home and the safer at home order was issued, and I was trying to homeschool 2 kids. And if you remember from the annual conference, I'd broken my ankle. So this was an interesting thing and a frustrating thing at first, but now that I'm on the other side, it's interesting. It definitely gave me more insight and more appreciation for some of what the farmers go to. Not that I didn't have appreciation before, but this definitely was a different spin on it. So next slide. So this is just kind of the timeline. I mean, a lot of people, we're all experiencing this. So, there was kind of this global spread in December. In January, you had a, emergency declared by World Health Organization. Then they declared a pandemic. In March, Wisconsin declared a safer at home order, shortly after our annual meeting and conference. One thing to kind of note is I have in here New York issues pause, which is also kind of their version of safer at home, and that'll come into play later. And then, starting at the end of March, beginning of April, we started getting, hearing about, farms being either asked to dump milk or, reduce production in some capacity. So in the course of, but basically between April 7th and April 30th, the county was trying to figure out what can we do to provide assistance. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at here as I talk about this. So next slide. Maybe, there we go. So what was happening happening behind there. This is what I'm going to go through our press release, the official press release that went out on April 30th, you know, highlighted the fact that we were partnering with Second Harvest and the dairy and pork producers and the farmers market and the Fair Share CSA, all of those things. We were partnering with all of them to get local food products to the food pantry in order to help people who were impacted with COVID-19. Not only, you know, people who need the food resources, but also hopefully helping the farmers and the producers with reductions that they were seeing from their side of view. When it got kind of dumped on my plate, I was like, wait, I really don't know anything about that end of the cow. I mean, I deal with manure, not milk. And if I do deal with milk, it's milk going into the manure pit, not milk going out into the world to be consumed. So this was very eye-opening. So just a little bit of what I've found, you know, to kind of lay the framework, you know, dumping milk, what does that mean? For the farmers that I talked with, or that my staff talked with, or that other people within the county organization talked with, what we were hearing basically for our county and our producers was that they were being asked to reduce production by 20%. Okay, well, still, that was a number out there, but how are they doing that, or what were they doing by reducing that production? So we had a lot of farmers who were putting the milk in storage, in their manure storage. We had some folks who were looking to maybe direct land apply, but the timing was a little off there because we were also planting. A lot of farms were planting. There were some people who, depending on where they were trying to maybe cull animals, but you know, the meat market and all of that was also collapsing at the same time. And we had some folks, a few farms that I talked with, who started modifying their feed rations and changing their feed mixtures so that it would reduce the amount of milk the cows were making, and then they were letting cows go dry sooner, but that obviously has kind of a lag time to it before you start seeing the impact in the amount of milk being produced. And then we had some folks who were told to, you know, retroactively go back to a certain date and reduce their production by 20%, which meant they were dumping more than 20% in order to make up for that retroactive component. So one farmer that we talked with, their entire morning milking was going to storage. They didn't keep any of their morning milk that they collected. So there were a lot of different ways that this was being talked about and brought up. And the biggest thing kind of I took home from it and from a lot of the farmers, you know, one, they were all very disheartened to have to even do this. You know, they supply a product for people to consume, and there were people who needed it to consume and they were dumping it. So there was that wasteful component to them and hardship that they were facing with that regard. But then also just thinking from the cows, I mean, they're not, you know, we don't turn the cow on and turn the cow off. It's not really a factory where we can shut down this line and keep working on this other line, and the cows just don't turn off. They still need to be fed, they still need to be milked, they still need all of those things. And it was really challenging for a lot of folks, and other people may have other experiences with the producers that they work with. So next slide. So why were they asked to dump the milk? You know, there's a lot of reasons. When you go through this list, you know, everything closed, all the restaurants, schools, things like that. So that demand for wholesale products shifted drastically. Obviously, since this is a global pandemic, it was also a global demand that dropped. So there's a lot of exports of dairy products, particularly cheeses and things. And people just obviously weren't consuming that. One of the things too is that the dairy industry, it's a fresh product, and they don't really store it from that standpoint. They don't do long-term storage. They don't stick it in a freezer, I guess, unless it's ice cream, or things like that. But their storage options are very limited. You can't take raw milk and stick it somewhere and wait until the processor's ready. There's timing associated with all that. Another thing that kind of came up is actually we have a lot of extra milk in the state. So we just have a lot of milk being produced. So we already had kind of this access in the pipeline that was already going through that plants were trying to use. And a lot of the facilities in the state are set up, like I said, for this wholesale thing, meaning they sell to big restaurant chains or schools or large institutions. They're not set up to do retail packaging or even at that quantity, and then everybody heard about, the panic buying and we don't have any toilet paper. Well, milk and things like that, we're experiencing the same thing because while, plants may have some capacity to do retail, a vast majority of their plant might be set up to do wholesale, and those two systems don't convert over easily. And then in addition, you had this issue of packaging where, just because maybe a plant could switch over to do cheese or shredded cheese or gallons of milk, but the cascade effect of the impact of employees either getting sick or being sent home where they source their packaging was also impacted. And then there was a lot just workforce in general, either people being sick or suddenly having to stay home with their children or other family members that needed care, and whether that was on the farm or whether it was the drivers that take the milk to the facilities, all of that. So the whole kind of chain was abruptly interrupted, and it's not a flexible system. So next slide. So our kind of role, when you think of the county, kind of started when we announced our small business pandemic support grant program, which was funding that came down through the federal government. And then we increased that funding on April 6th. And with that, we got a question from our farmer-led organization, one of them in the county, kind of saying, hey, where can we put this stuff? So this is where the question of, does the county have cooler space to hold milk on reserve? Or is there other things that we can do to kind of bank or hold on to this product so that they didn't have to dump as much milk, the manufacturers could continue manufacturing, and then we could have all of this stuff for when the pandemic slowed down. They were good questions. They were kind of interesting. This is where I said, what? I don't know anything about this. So, okay, I'll research it. Next slide. So it kind of evolved. We started with that question of, do we have cooler space? Well, we don't have cooler space. County doesn't, we don't have coolers like that. So we knew that was kind of off the table, and we didn't really have any facilities when we started researching in the county. We didn't have even any companies that had capacity. We have big warehouse facilities, things like that, but they didn't have capacity for this either. So that really wasn't an option. So then there was this, well, how do we help our local dairy farmers, but also help our residents in our communities who also have a need for food? And in communications with the food banks and Second Harvest, dairy products, that fresh product is a difficult thing for them to obtain and then also to distribute, because it has to stay refrigerated or because it's fresh. So then we started looking at, well, how can we help that component of it? And will that then help the producers? So that's kind of where our question evolved to. Next slide. So what kind of numbers are we talking about, you know? And one of the folks in our department kind of did some back of the napkin calculations. So none of these numbers are exact. They're just averages based on the numbers that we were being told. So you have kind of, what is the food pantry need? So when we were talking to the pantry, they said, well, we would be Ooh, I don't know what that was. Milk production per day is about 4.4 million pounds per day. If we assume everybody was asked to dump 20%, that's what was being dumped, was 880,000 gallons. So over a period of 60 days, they're dumping 52 million pounds of milk. Okay, well, the food pantry needs 2.4 million pounds of milk. So when you do that math, if we were to have some direct correlation between the two, we would really only help farmers for almost 3 days. And then they would have to be back to dumping. So we knew that whatever solution we came up with, it wasn't going to solve the problem because we just have too much milk and not enough. We have demand, but not enough demand just locally. So that was kind of something that we had to play with in the back of our minds. And as we're talking with farmers, also make them understand that, you know, we're trying to help, we're going to work on this, but we may be able to ease the pain, but we're probably not eliminating the pain. So that's something to keep in mind. Next slide. So when you look at all those numbers, obviously 2 + 2 does not equal anything. So we really had this disproportionate level of the milk being produced versus the need, and how do we reconcile that? So next slide. So then one of the questions we kind of had was, you know, where do our farmers ship their milk? So throughout this, we found out there's a whole complicated system that is involved in this. So there are some farms that do a direct purchase where the processor directly buys from them. There are buyers and cooperatives and milk brokers who act as like a middle person to get milk from here to there. And then, at least for our county, we really don't have many, but these kind of all-in-one where the farm, you know, produces the milk, but also produces the products at the end. Next slide. So what do we have in Dane County? Because, you know, of course, we wanted to help Dane County farms, help Dane County businesses, and then provide the food to Dane County residents. So when we go through and research everything, looking at DACAP websites and all the cheese factories, all of these different things, we had what was classified about 20 kind of localish dairy plants in the county. But when you actually dug into that, most of them were retail packaging processors, meaning they would take the large product that was produced somewhere else and either shred it or slice it or do whatever else they had to do so that you could buy it at the grocery store. So that wasn't really what we were looking for because they're not doing anything with the actual milk. They're getting the product and then in turn getting that out. We have some ice cream shops in Dane County, so there was that. And we only have one processing facility, and ironically, it's the Babcock Dairy Plant out at UW. Well, that wasn't really going to be helpful for us because UW was also closed down as well. So then we were kind of branching out like, well, okay, what about butter? Well, there's about 14 facilities roughly in the state that we could find, and there were about 13 retail milk facilities. So we were trying to find where we could go with all of this stuff. And one of the things we found out is we don't really have anything local. We have no ability to really shift gears and use this product locally to get it out locally. Next slide. So I felt like this was my game, this game of chasing the cheese. Where am I going? And truthfully, I felt like, you know, one of those folks in the background where I was tripped and fell and rolling and was never going to catch it. So next slide. So we kind of started this, I call it a game of telephone, because it was a lot of back and forth, either via email, texts, phone calls, all of this stuff to try to come up with some solutions and better understand the system and what was available out there. So we did coordinate with the 2 farmer-led group leaders in our county because they were the ones that were kind of approaching us saying, hey, can you provide assistance to us? So those were the 2 primary organizations that we were working with. And both of the chairs of those groups send their milk to Grande Cheese. So then there was this idea, well, let's talk to Grande, see if we can ship all this extra milk there and they can make a product and give it to Second Harvest and we'll distribute it. So we had this conference call with Grande Cheese and the farmers in the county, and this is where it got kind of interesting. So Grande Cheese makes a lot of kind of Italian cheese. Mozzarella is the big one. And because we already had this kind of excess, they maintain a certain amount of cheese kind of in reserve so that they can meet the demand of orders and things that come in. So one, they already had cheese in storage that they were trying to get out and going places, but their storage capacity was very limited. The other thing is the smallest quantity of cheese that they could produce in their factory was 5-pound bags of mozzarella. So they do have a history already of donating to the food banks. You know, they didn't want to donate everything that we were talking about because that impacts their end of the business, but they do have a history of doing donations like that, and that is what they would donate. So as a participant in one of those programs, if you needed to use the service of the food bank and Grande Cheese had made a donation, you would be getting a 5-pound bag of mozzarella. But then when we started talking about, you know, one of these things, and this is where we get back to New York, is that their primary customers are pizza, and particularly pizza in New York City. And during all of this, New York completely shut down. So their primary, I guess, customer was gone. So that really showed the impact. It wasn't so much the demand in Wisconsin had decreased or necessarily had been the primary impact. It was the demand in New York, which all of our cheese from this one factory was going there. Some of the other things we talked about was, you know, it does kind of have this short shelf life. They hold themselves to a high standard, so they sell a high quality product and they don't want to do anything that would impact the quality of their products. So, you know, they weren't willing to freeze their material, their cheese and things like that too. So these were all things that we were thinking about and learning about as we were trying to figure out what a solution would be. Next slide. So then we were trying to figure out some other stuff, and we got on a conference call with representatives from the Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, who are part of Dairy Farmers of America. And this is where it got kind of confusing too, where they act as a broker. So the farms are kind of in there and they help match the producers with the processors, but in some cases they may also be a processor. And the big thing was that in Wisconsin, the cheese is by far the thing we make with our milk. And it was a very eye-opening conversation to listen to them kind of talk about what they thought we could or couldn't do, and then the complexities of the system. And so one of the things that they brought up that I guess I would have never guessed is, you know, our milk moves around. Next slide. So we think we're the dairy state and all the milk stays here. Ironically, milk comes from all over the country to Wisconsin to be processed into Wisconsin cheese. And then Wisconsin milk gets exported outside of the state to be made into products outside of the state. So we were not only fighting this battle of our farmers were being asked to reduce the quantity of milk they were sending to processors, but we were also dealing with, even if they reduced it, you know, we might be getting milk shipped up from Florida. And I don't know what they're telling Florida farmers, which was really what they said. They said, we get milk from Florida and Wisconsin ships milk to Florida. So it was a very weird, like, why are we moving this milk all around before it's processed when we produce more than enough in our state to handle all of it? So I don't have an answer for that. It just was this additional layer of complexity to the system that is hard to overcome. Next slide. So in the end, I was asked to make a list. And this list was what we were going to provide to Second Harvest, part of a contract to say, hey, whenever possible, source your dairy products from here because this is where a lot of our farmers ship their milk to. So, you know, we had a lot of input from the farmer-led groups. We talked with Grande Cheese and the dairy farmers of Wisconsin. We talked with the food bank to see who they've already had a relationship with. And there's some, you know, DATCAP keeps licensed information out there. And with all of this, you know, people playing phone tag, calling farmers, we narrowed it down to 7 entities. Not all of them produce it, but so they were kind of this combination of buyers, sellers, brokers, and processors. So these are the 7 that we initially gave to Second Harvest as here are some of the priorities because they take milk from Dane County farmers. It was kind of funny because in talking with the chairs of both farmer-led groups, one of them mentioned that, you know, he was contacting their members and his neighbors and just kind of having that conversation. And he realized that even as farmers, they don't ever talk about this. They don't talk about where their milk goes. He had no idea where his neighbor's milk went, or what they were being asked, or, you know, how it was impacting them. They just, that wasn't the conversation that came up when they were talking. They may be talking about crops or all this other stuff, but where the actual milk went, they didn't know. A lot of times the farmer didn't really know what was happening with it either. He said, well, Trump, and it was, I guess, to Grande. It was a very interesting thing to know that even some of the farmers didn't have a good handle on the complexity of the system, and that there were even more complexities that they mentioned that I don't even mention in this presentation. So next slide. So with all of that research, this is kind of what we came up with. The county contracted with Second Harvest Food Bank because they're the primary food bank that supplies the smaller food banks in the county. And we provided $3 million to them, which in talking with the food bank was a huge amount of money. And even they didn't know how to handle or set up a process or procedure to do this, to focus on locally produced farm products. So even in talking with them, they hired consultants to help them even set up a system that they could use to do this. The $3 million, if you're wondering where that came from, was from funds the county received from the federal government for COVID response. We provided them that list of preferred processors to purchase from. We can't require them, but that's where we asked them to do in the hopes that that would help our local farmers. A couple weeks later, we actually provided them another $3 million to continue this program. The county also offered the Alliant Energy Center, which is our conference center that the county owns, where the fair is and World Dairy Expo, all those things. So we offered that facility to be used as an area to prep the food boxes because, again, we're also, Second Harvest relies on a lot of our volunteers, and we're all being asked to social distance and not be together, so they needed some space to be able to spread out. The county also rented cold storage trailers. So one of Second Harvest limiting factors was that they can only take so much dairy product because their cold storage is very limited. So even if they were to bring it to a local pantry, they may have a refrigerator, but that's not gonna hold 50 gallons of milk and butter and cheese. So we rented cold storage trailers to be kept at the Alliant Energy Center so that as they put boxes together for people to pick up, it was all in one place. And, the demand, when you talk about the demand that was needed, and they saw an uptick, 65 to 70% need for more resources from this time last year. So the demand and need is definitely out there. And I think we were trying to really help in that regard. Next slide. So in the end though, I go through it and I look and, this is from the CDC, ironically. This is what we see as far as the production line for how milk goes from the farm to your table. But in reality, there are about 30 other little steps in here that no one person can try to explain. So a farmer was really unable to be able to tell me how their milk got to where it got to easily. Some just didn't know. And it depended on the size of the farm as well. So, we went into this thinking, oh, well, this will be pretty simple. Farmer A goes to, processor B and we'll just pay processor B to make more cheese and then give it to Second Harvest. It didn't work at all like that. Next slide. So I don't really mention it, but the press release did, if you remember way back in the beginning. We also talked about pork and vegetables. These were it was kind of a three-prong approach. I was kind of focused more on trying to find the avenue for dairy to be part of this project. We did a little bit of research on pork because we do have some pork producers in our county. And if we thought milk was complicated, meat processing is even worse. It was very convoluted, and I can't even begin to explain how it worked. The little bit that I got was like one pork producer that we were talking about. He makes grows really high-end pigs that are then butchered and then sold to high-end restaurants around the nation. So that's not really the material that they donate. And all of, at the same time, all of the pork and beef and meat, facilities were all also having their own issues with supply chain and workforce and all of that stuff too. So there was this whole other component of pork, and, in the end, that was a different thing that I didn't have to work on, thankfully. And then vegetables too. We were trying to figure out how do we source local, more local vegetables and get people fresh food. And that was a role that our extension office kind of took on in partnering with our the Fair Share CSA organization and things to try to connect a lot of the CSA farmers or the farmer market producers that go there and sell their produce there. Because, you know, right now, even the farmer's market, like there is no farmer's market on Saturday downtown that looks like it did traditionally. So trying to also make those people whole to some degree. Next slide. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what did I learn specifically as a conservation specialist and trying to work and help assist farmers in this industry? One, it's complicated. So if we think conservation was complicated and water quality and all of those things, just the entire market is extremely complicated, and really the farmer has no say in it. So it's one of the few industries where one of the farmers told me, you know, I sell everything at wholesale and I buy everything at retail prices. It's kind of a backwards thing. There's also no buffer. You know, the floor falls out from under you, floor falls, and there's nowhere to land. Our system doesn't have a capacity to handle something like a pandemic or things like that. The farmers really had a lot of limited options, even what to do. You know, we couldn't store the milk, they can't sell it raw, they can't, because they couldn't package it. There just wasn't any options. So, you know, here they are taking a product that they're very proud of producing and having to, you know, stick it in a manure pit. So a lot of them, it was hard for a lot of them from a mental standpoint. Also, we have facilities, you know, all the facilities that we have. You know, Wisconsin is the dairy state, and we have cheese factories and milk facilities. We have things everywhere. I don't think you can throw a rock without hitting something. But they can't shift gears easily. You know, they're set up. They're kind of the factory, and they're set up as a one-way system, and they can't shift easily. And again, I think I noted this before, you know, farmers weren't really aware of this whole process either. They kind of work with their one processor in most cases, and they don't necessarily diversify their processors either. So it's not like they ship milk to 3 different places. They ship it to one, and if that one says no go, they're kind of stuck. That was something that came out of this. And obviously I noted pork and meat is way more complicated. And I'm not even gonna go where the pigs went in our county. Ironically, in some cases, we had farmers that were being asked to increase milk production, which was really initially strange when I was thinking about it, because here we have all these people who are asked to dump milk. Why are some people asked to increase their milk? Well, again, it kind of deals with who they send their milk to. So we do have farms that send their milk to smaller local cheese factories or facilities that make local products that are then sold in retail. So they're not really part of the national or global markets. They're part of kind of this local component. And it really drove home that, you know, keeping things local probably helps all of us maintain some capacity. And I think if you sat in on Marie's talk yesterday, the social hour, you know, she kind of drove that home too. So we really did have farms that were asked to increase because that demand for, you know, retail products, panic buying, all that was increasing. And then the whole trading of milk is just crazy. The fact that we have Florida milk coming to Wisconsin to make Wisconsin cheese, why? We make plenty of milk here, so why is that even happening? And there is no good answer that I could get. So next slide. So, you know, I think some of the things we have to think about, you know, and who knows how long the pandemic's going to go, you know, how long is all of this impacted? Are some people impacted more or less? You know, and kind of what's the price? You know, we have an economic and financial price, but then we have an impact, you know, what is this personal impact to the farmers? And this public perception. I think there were a lot of people that were blaming the farm industry. Why are you throwing away this milk when I can't buy a gallon of milk at the grocery store? well, it's not, it wasn't on the farmer. It was everything in between. So this is all going on in the background, and having, huge impacts, obviously. And next slide. The end question that I was left with is, a farmer's dealing with all of that, and where do we fit conservation into all of this? And that was kind of the question. Here I am, or here are my staff, or things. Hey, let's go put cover crops in, and they're good, they're great. We can, sell that. But in the meantime, on the other end of the farm, there's all of this other stuff that's impacting those decisions. And I think we've always known that, just, a pandemic definitely brings it home. So that's what I have with what I learned. And again, I'm not an expert, but I would suspect our next session has some information there as well that might be helpful.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Amy. If anybody in the audience has questions or any advice to offer what their county has done, please feel free to type it into the chat box now. We have about 5 minutes before the session ends. Well, I don't see any questions coming through just yet. So I think we can break a little bit early. Again, thank you, Amy, for your presentation today. Coming up next, starting at 9:50, in this room we have implementing water quality-based standards, challenges and opportunities. You can stay in this room if you'd like that. In the main room, we have financial implications of COVID-19 on counties. You can find the Zoom link for this session in the virtual agenda, which is in the chat box now, or you can check your email. And thank you again, Amy, for taking the time to present to us. Thank you to Rachel and Extension for hosting, and thanks to each of you for joining us at this virtual CountyCon meeting.